seek in holy love to save all people from aimlessness and sin. You judge people and nations by your righteous will, declared through prophets and apostles. In Jesus Christ, the man of Nazareth, our crucified and risen Savior, you have come to us and shared our common lot, conquering sin and death, and reconciling the world to yourself. You bestow upon us your Holy Spirit, creating and renewing your Church of Jesus Christ, binding in covenant faithful people of all ages, tongues, and races. You call us into your church to accept the cost and joy of discipleship, to be your servants in the service of others, to proclaim the gospel to all the world, and resist the powers of evil, to share in Christ's baptism and eat at his table, to join in his passion and truth. You promise to all who trust you forgiveness of sin and fullness of grace, courage in the struggle for justice and peace, your presence in trial and rejoicing, and eternal life in your realm as your name. Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto you. Amen.
Join us in singing Praise of Our Mother, found on page number 410 in the African American Hymnal, Heritage Hymnal.
Thank And we believe that God is still in the business of changing things. So as we now go to the altar, you go to your altar, and we're going to go to the collective altar together. And whatever you have in your heart that requires God's attention, we want you to pray for. Whatever requires God's intervention, we want you to leave it at the altar. Amen? Amen. Holy Mother God, with grateful hearts and humble spirits and open minds, we approach the throne of grace. Thank you for the many blessings you so graciously bestow on us. You grant to us new mercies each day, minute by minute, and day by day. Mother God, today more than ever, we need your joy. Joy to keep going in the dark and uncertain days. More than ever, we need to hear from you. To hear your still speaking voice, a whisper in the wings of chaos, or a mighty roar in the mountains of despair. Comfort us, Mother God. Grant us your abiding peace, a peace that is beyond our human understanding, a peace that only can be given by the Prince of Peace. A most gracious and loving God, holy, holy is your character. Lawyer and doctor, mediator and protector, wise counselor, meet us here, right where we are, in all of our frailties and fears, in our moments of hopelessness and craziness. Yes, we get a little crazy sometimes. We pray for you to shine a light in the spaces and places where we need more compassion, greater tolerance, and yes, a little more patience. Clear out the anxious worry, the fear-based thoughts that seep into our minds, creating distress and disruption. Remind us that you are not a God of confusion. We pray for abundance in our family, in our finances. For you are not a God of lack. We pray for our elderly, our young, our marginalized members and friends. We know a God, a mighty God, who specializes in healing sick bodies, sick hearts, sick ways, and yes, sick minds. We know a God who specializes in meeting our unique needs and challenges in each of our lives today. Yet, God, for your grace and mercies, where we be. For our brothers and sisters who are absent from this community, our sick and shut in, send healing light and let them rest on the wings of angels. Bring healing and reconciliation to those who are battered and abused and victimized. Lift our burdens, erase and blot out the things that shame us, and heal our troubled life affairs. We fight spiritual battles not of this world, and battle evil men and women in high places. We fight against the sins of sexism and racism and classism and the other isms in our broken and troubled world. Give us strength to stand up and wisdom to speak. On the holy ground we stand. Forgive us when we trust in our own strength, when we trust in our positions in life, when we trust in our bank accounts, for surely these things of this world will fail us. Help us to heed the gospel call to feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, console the grieving, welcome the stranger, and set the prisoners free. Grant us overcoming victorious power, the kind of power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, your chains and my chains. Break the chains that bind the lives of our young children and our adult children. Break every chain. Break every chain, Lord, we pray. I hear there is an army rising up. I hear the chains are falling. Every chain is broken. Every weapon formed and pointed to you and me, in the name of Jesus, is broken. We praise you. We worship you. We love you. We lift up your mighty name. Holy Mother God, thank you for hearing our prayers and answering our calls. In the name of righteousness and justice, all that is good, we say amen. Amen. Our good one? How many had a good one? Reverend Hagler, your mother, this is your mother's year. This is Reverend Hagler. This is your first year without your mother? She died? Yes. How many see how many people had a good mother? A good one. A good one. All of them are good ones. Some of the ladies in the trash can. Some people were married to me, right? Well, as we see, so I want to tell you how good my mother was and how much she loved me. God loves me more than my mother loved me. Can you imagine that? That's a lot of love. Your mother loved you, Reverend Hagler, but God loves you more than your mother loved you. So when you see this, you got to get excited because my mother prayed for me. I'm all right. It was a good mother, man. Y'all got it? Come on, everybody. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Come on. Somebody pray for me. They got me on the mind. She ain't gonna forget about me. Pray for me. I'm so glad. I'm so glad they pray. I'm so glad. I'm so glad they pray. I'm so glad they pray for me. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Somebody. They could have just forgotten all about you. But they kept me on your mind. They took a little time to pray for me. I'm so glad they pray. I'm so glad they pray. I'm so glad they pray for me. Somebody say the preacher prayed. The preacher prayed. And all of his visitors, he still had me on his mind. Took a little time and said, Lord, bless Tommy this morning. Come on. I'm so glad. So glad. I'm so glad. Yeah. And then I like this one. Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. In the Garden of Gethsemane. He took the time and prayed. Yeah, come on, y'all. He was going to the death, but he took the time to pray for us. He said one time, Jesus prayed. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane. In the Garden of Gethsemane. He did what? Took the time. Woo! On his way to his death. He had me on his mind. And I'm so glad. That's why I said somebody prayed for me. They had me on their mind. They took a little time.
Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers and all those who are mothering. Good morning, Reverend Hagler, Ms. Davis, Reverend Boyd, Reverend Brown, Reverend Wilson, Senior Choir,
Good morning.
musicians, officers, members, and friends. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Irma Slaughter, and I'm a member of the Leaders Ministry. It is my pleasure to recognize all guests who are worshiping with us today. Would you please stand when your name is called and remain standing until all guests have been recognized? Joyce Armu, Union Temple Baptist Church, Washington, D.C. Would all guests who did not register please stand? And I'd also like to welcome our guest speaker, Elizabeth Davis. On behalf of our pastor, Reverend Hagler, the ministerial team, and members of Plymouth, we welcome you to our service. We hope and trust that the spoken word, the sincere prayers, the sacred music, and the warm fellowship of our members will touch you in such a way that you will come back and worship with us again. You may be seated. And in honor of Mother's Day, I found this, it's called Mother's Day. Mother's Day is Remembrance Day, when we pause on the path of the year to pay honor and worshipful tribute to the mothers our hearts hold dear. For whether here or in heaven, her love is our haven and guide. For always the memory of mother is a beacon light shining inside. Time cannot destroy her memory, and the years can never erase the tenderness and the beauty of the love in a mother's face. And when we think of our mothers, we draw nearer to God above. For only God in his greatness could fashion a mother's love. Again, welcome.
Thanks, Sister Ina, for that welcome. And Reverend Boyd mentioned in her pastoral prayer that Jesus was and is and will always be the Prince of Peace. Jesus says, "This peace I give to you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you." And then he said something that was just so comforting, so beautiful, and so powerful. He said, "Let not your heart be troubled." And that's a good thing. That if you take the peace of God, who's given to us by the Prince of Peace, and not let our hearts be troubled, then we can go a long way. Feeling comforted, being protected, and as I know as our pastor could touch on a little bit today, concerning how we can really be loving one another. So, I want you to take this peace of God and greet one another and spread it among each other, so that we can begin to really or continue to love each other, love our neighbor, as God wants us to love. So may the peace of God be with you. Let us get up and greet one another and walk one another.
What's your problem? Huh? Which one? The video? I'm calling you.
let us come back together. Let us join back together at this time. Always a wonderful thing to greet each other and to share the love, the peace, and the joy of Jesus with each other. And as we come back together, I want to mark this time as a very important, special time in the life of the church. And I would like to invite forth Sister Rachel Wood to come forth and someone can help Sister Ernestine. Amen. You can stay right there if you want to. All right. Amen. And the congregation is invited to follow along with me on page 34 of the United Church of Christ Hymn. And we are, in a sense, reinstating the membership of Sister Ernestine Mitchell, who never really left anything. Amen. So we're just recognizing that today, so we will include her name in this. Amen. And so these persons, Sister Ernestine Mitchell and Rachel Wood, have indicated their desire to unite with us in this household of faith. And they have come here to profess their faith and to join us in serving Jesus the Christ. Hear the words of our Lord says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, that your fruit should abide. Everyone who acknowledges me before human beings, I will also acknowledge before my Creator who is in heaven. Jesus Christ has joined you, has chosen you, and in baptism has joined you to himself, has called you together with us into the church which is his body. Now they brought you to this time and place to unite with us in the ministries and blessings of this congregation. As you come into our midst, we invite you to reaffirm your faith as members of the Church of Jesus Christ. I ask each of you to reaffirm your faith in God as your Creator, in Christ as your Lord, and the Holy Spirit as your strength. Do you reaffirm, do you promise to participate in the life and mission of this family of God's people, sharing regularly in the worship of God and listening to the work of this congregation as it serves the community and the world? And I ask you some additional questions. Do you promise to be engaged in a study of your scripture, seeking out the Word of God that might guide you and lead you in your lives? And do you promise to be open to the urgings of the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit directs you and guides you? Then let us, the members of the Plymouth congregation of the United Church of Christ, rise and express our welcome and affirm our mutual ministry together, joining together in this covenant. The bold-faced prayer, page 35. We welcome you with joy as partners in the common life of this church. We promise you our friendship and prayer as we share the hopes and labors of the Church of Jesus Christ. God grant that together we may continue to grow in his knowledge and love and be witnesses of our risen Lord. Draw me a moment of prayer. Lord, we just thank you. We thank you for Sister Rachel Wood coming to be with us and Sister Ernestine Mitchell rejoining, Lord. We just ask for your blessings to be upon each of them as they bless us with their prayers and their participation and their work in the church and in the community. Lord, let us all be engaged together in a very secret and hopeful work that we might glorify you, Lord, and others might see in us the workings of you. Bless us now, we pray this prayer in the holy name of Jesus our Christ. Amen. 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 And Sister Wood, Sister Liv, on behalf of the congregation of the United Church of Christ, I stand with you in the right hand of Christian Fellowship. Welcome you into the membership. Ernestine, bless you and welcome back. The deacons want to greet each of you all. So, go ahead.
Thank you.
forth and reflect the power and the love of God in your very being. Go forth and serve humanity as a child of God. Amen. Lift up a few announcements as we proceed forward today. One, I just want to say again, Happy Mother's Day to all of the women that are here. Happy Mother's Day, and may you be tremendously blessed, not only this day and not only this week, but for all time, that you be blessed. And we ask all of the men if you could just stand and salute the women that you're standing next to. Amen. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I want to also give thanks to God for our guest speaker this morning, Sister Elizabeth Davis. Amen. We will be blessed by her, and she is just such a gracious person, filled with her own form of power, vinegar, fine brimstone. Amen. Amen. I'm thankful for her for just being able to share this moment with us on this day. I want to remind you also of Bible study from noon on Thursdays. And so also this week, and Sister Ina Starr, she told me I better not forget this, right, Ina? Amen. Ina has spread me all kinds of ways, like she does every single week. That we're going to have a spoken word arts this midweek service this week at 6:30. A brother that goes by the name Analysis, but it's Ken Brown. Ken Brown grew up in Heritage United Church of Christ in Baltimore, and is over in Baltimore, and is coming to share a word with us on this Thursday at 6:30. Come and be blessed and be a part of that service with us. And you will, okay, that's number 2. 6:30 Thursday. All right, and I want to remind us on the 20th of May at 11, which is we have our quarterly church committee meeting. And so plan on being a part of that. And then on the first Wednesday of June, June the 7th, at 7 p.m., we will have our semi-annual meeting of the congregation. And do not forget on May 21st, Major Kemp and friends will be in concert at the benefit concert to and for the church. And so you will not want to miss that. So come and be blessed by Major Kemp and friends. And Roy on the viola will be a part of that as well. And you know that Roy knows how to make that viola talk and do all kinds of things. So come and be a blessing with that. Today is Community Sunday, and we also have a second offering in addition to our regular offering. I just want to say a few things because of the matter about generosity. A couple things. A couple of weeks ago, we had Amy Goodman that spoke here in this pulpit as a benefit for the church and for WTU Radio. And that event raised well over $4,000, and our part of that was $2,000 some dollars. And so we give thanks for that. And also I want to salute, I saw her come in a little while ago, Lori Williams. Who got Lori? Right up there, look right at you. Lori did her art expo last Sunday and raised $800 for the church. And there's something that's going on with a painting.
Yeah, I'm going to submit a painting, and we'll do a fundraiser for Father's Day starting next Sunday.
All right. There's a painting that is going to be auctioned off as a fundraiser for the church again, so be aware of that. There's also a guy that every time I go and speak on Palestine, usually in California, down in California, I speak there, and he always gives me a check to bring back to the church. And I haven't seen him in a while. but this week he sent $1,000 to the church as a charity. And so what it is, you got people out there all over that are blessing the church in many, many different ways. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of power that is going on. People are praying, people are doing things, people are moving the church. That's something to be excited about. Amen. I'd be excited about all of the energy and the emotion that you see going on. You see the latest sidewalk has been installed outside. There's a lot of things to rejoice in. Are you rejoicing?
Yes.
Amen. 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 So don't be afraid to come up and say, well, he's making us rejoice and he gets ready to ask for some money. You're right again. Amen. All right? So give your hands yourself an applause because you're right again. I'm certainly going to ask for your money. Right? But it's not me asking for your money, really. Right? It's a matter of us coming to understand that we have been blessed in so many ways. We've been blessed.
Yes.
Just even wake up this morning
Yes. Yes.
is a blessing.
Yes, sir.
I don't know about you, but the journey through last week, the fact that I got through last week and you came through last week,
Yes.
is a blessing.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Dr. Crockett, see another milestone is a blessing.
Yes. Amen. Yes. Amen.
That's what it means when we say count your blessings.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Count them one by one. Count your many blessings. See what God has done.
Amen. Amen.
And sometimes we need to remind ourselves about that.
Yes.
Because sometimes we'll get these little detours in the middle of life that get us all messed up and start thinking that things are just looking bleak and sorrowful and all that. And then we have to remind ourselves that it doesn't all look like that. But God's blessings have been more than that.
Yes.
And so we come to that time where we bring our tithes, our gifts, our offerings into the Lord's house. We'll be followed with a second offering. The second offering is the benevolence fund of the church that goes towards helping people in the church and in the community who are going through difficult situations in their life, a way in which the church can respond and help people to move forward. Be generous, for the Lord has been generous. Trustees, if you come forth and prepare to receive tithes and offerings, they'll be followed by members of the diaconate that will lift up the second benevolent offering.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many blessings that you've given us. One of those blessings being from the Congregation United Church of Christ, and the blessing to be able to minister to people within the walls of the church, but outside the walls of the church. And we know that it takes gifts of our congregation to keep that ministry going. So we ask you that you bless the gifts that our congregation will be doing today and bless them as they give, as you blessed them before. Amen.
All right, everybody needs a hymnal. Because you everybody go sing. We're going to sing a song called The Church is One Foundation. So on page 337, if everybody would get a hymnal, please. On page 337, when I turn around, I want all of you all with those beautiful voices to join in with us on the fourth verse where it says, yet she on earth hath union. I'm going to turn around and motion to you, and we're going to all do that like one body of Christ. The church is one foundation. Okay.
One foundation.
gifts that are our children. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you with gratefulness and thankfulness for these young people, these young children that stand with us today.
Amen.
We just thank you for the blessings that they are. The blessings of being images and likenesses of innocence in a world that is filled with less than innocence right now. And we thank you that they show us what true love and what unconditional love and non-judgmental love can look like. So we just thank you for the blessings that they are. And we thank you for the blessings of the mothers and the mother figures who make them the blessings that they are.
Amen. Amen.
By raising them the way they should go, and being with them and loving them, and hugging them when they need love and hugs. And we bring to you also today the children who, on this Mother's Day, can't hug their mother. There are many on this today that can't do that. But I'll lift up my nephews Lance, Lawrence, and Logan today, as this will be the first Mother's Day that they will not be able to hug their mother and give her a Mother's Day card. So I ask you to envelope them in love and envelope all the other children who can't hug their mother today. But also ask you that even on that sad note, we know that life brings joy. And so we ask today that you bless these children with unspeakable joy and happiness. Whether it comes from playing with their friends or getting that ice cream after church. That you bless them with that joy and happiness. Thank you for these blessings. Thank you for these children. Amen.
shall put these words of mine in your heart and soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and fix them as an emblem on your forehead. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you are at home and when you are away, and when you lie down and when you rise up. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land that the Lord swore to your ancestors to give them, as long as the heavens are above the earth. May God add a blessing to the reading of those words. Amen. Amen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mother's Day. Mothers give us life and love and hold our families together. Mothers have always been activists and leaders, teaching us how to live and make our communities better. So on this day, mothers, women of Plymouth, I honor you, we honor you, and we say Happy Mother's Day. My job today is to introduce our speaker, but before I do that, I do want to present her with some flowers. So Reverend Brown, if you will present her with flowers from our Plymouth family to you. And before I introduce, I have one other thing I'd like to do, and I'm going to ask everyone that is a public school employee, current or former, from the choir through the congregation to the balcony, will you please stand? We are a family. I want you to just recognize that we are a public school supportive church. And that, Ms. Davis, that does not include our 8 o'clock group that was here as well. So I just wanted to make you aware you're among friends. Highly qualified public education, community engagement, organizing, collective bargaining, political activism, leader are just a few of the words that are associated with our speaker today. Elizabeth Davis, President Elizabeth A. Davis, is a 40-year, highly effective, award-winning educator. She has always been at the forefront of public education, advocacy, and reform. Mrs. Davis was teaching at Phelps Architectural Engineering High School in Washington, D.C. before winning the election for president of the Washington Teachers Union in July of 2013. President Davis is dedicated to advancing and promoting quality education, improving teaching and learning conditions, and aggressively protecting teachers' rights. Ms. Davis's writings about social justice teaching and teaching leadership has been published in 3 nationally acclaimed books: Putting the Movement Back into Civil Rights Teaching, Writing for a Change, and How Teachers Become Leaders. She is a graduate of D.C.'s Eastern High School and holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Technology Education from American University and a Master's of Arts degree in Educational Administration. Ms. Davis is a member of D.C. Muriel Bowser's Education Transition Team, the American Federation of Teachers Program and Policy Council, the Metro Labor Council Executive Board, Delta Kappa Gamma International Society of Women Educators, the D.C. Writing Project, the National Commission of Writing, and Howard University's Board of Directors. It is my pleasure at this time to give you our speaker, Mrs. Elizabeth Davis.
Good morning and happy Mother's Day. Good morning. Praise God. One thing that in my bio was that I am a member of Brown Memorial AME Church. So I do want you to know that that is also part of my repertoire, and I have been a member there since 1972. Of course, if I went today, they would probably ask me to stand up to be a guest because I'm absent more than I should be. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here this morning. I'm a teacher. I will always be a teacher. I've taught in D.C. public schools for 44 years. And of course, I've been president of the Teachers Union for an additional 4 years. So that would give me 48 years as an educator in D.C. public schools. Thank you. And when Reverend Hagler called to ask me to speak here this morning, the first thing I said was, Reverend Hagler, I am not a preacher. I'm a teacher. He said, but you do preach occasionally. And of course, when I think of all of the years and the 9 schools I've taught in D.C. public schools, beginning in 1972 at the age of 19, because teaching was not really the profession I chose, it sort of chose me. I was an engineering student studying architecture. And of course, one of my professors who asked me to intern under an architect for 1 year, I followed that path and realized that it was not for me and began to determine how was I going to change direction. One of my professors, Dr. Hansen, who was the subject of Hansen versus Henson in D.C., the lawsuit that desegregated the schools, advised me to try teaching for 1 year. And I said, well, my background is in engineering. He said, teach drafting. We don't have a drafting teacher in the middle school. So I developed the curriculum and went to Jefferson Junior High School where he sent me. The very first day, the principal informed me that he was expecting a man. He said, I've never heard of a woman vocational education teacher. So apparently I was the first. He asked me to report back to Human Resources because he needed a man teacher. And of course, being the person that my mother raised, I reported back to Human Resources and I went to the 9th floor at 441 12th Street and filed a Title IX sex discrimination complaint against the principal and the school district. And that lesson did not come from my professors. That came from my mother. And the title that when Reverend Hagler asked me, what do you want to talk on? I want to talk on mothers as God's first teachers. Because when I think of my mother, I think of all of those lessons she taught me, in many cases without even knowing it. Lessons that I took for granted until I was absolutely grown or at a place where I needed to recall those lessons. My mother moved me here from North Carolina from a segregated school system. And she did not want me or my sibling to attend segregated schools as she had done. So it was a brave move for her to move to Washington, D.C. with 5 kids. I didn't think about how brave that was until later, watching her work 2 jobs and continue to go to school to finish her own high school diploma. When I think of the lessons that our mothers taught us, a lot of those lessons are never taught on university campuses. You know, university campuses teach you how to read, write, and solve problems. But it doesn't teach you how to resist, how to rise up. It doesn't teach you revolution, and it doesn't teach you to interrogate the world when things are wrong. And those are the lessons that came from my mother and father, more so my mother, because she was, and when I think back to the years of advice, and sometimes that advice came with a switch or stick, but it also came with lessons from the Bible. We went to church every Sunday. It was not an option. When I was grown, I had to teach Sunday school whether I wanted to or not. But the lessons that she taught, most of them were modeled, not spoken. When we moved from North Carolina, she moved into a house on A Street in Northeast. And she was a farmer. I'm still a farmer. I plant everything. I have a green thumb. I got it from her. She planted vegetables in her backyard. And of course, the house we lived in was on Capitol Hill. And although our neighbors were African Americans, they did not appreciate her growing vegetables in her backyard. And I recall, even though I was a young teenager, I remember thinking, why is that a problem? She's not bothering anyone. But she was a proud farmer And although she would come in the evening and she'd plant her collard greens, and well, the woman that complained and started a petition, I'll never forget, she and her brother owned a business, a printing company for African Americans at that time. That was huge. And she actually began this petition to have my mother to get rid of the garden. And later, and of course it didn't carry any weight because she continued to grow vegetables. But later this woman fell sick, and she lived right next door to us. The very first person to go and tend to her, to take her food, was my mother. And she took her vegetables from her garden. I'll never forget that. And I thought to myself, even though in my mind I was thinking, I don't like Miss Johnson. But my mother, and I wanted to know, why are you helping her? But I would never say that, because my mother also taught us to respect your elders. And there are certain questions you simply don't ask them. You don't have the age or authority to do that yet. But I learned a lesson from her. And that was, you always show love. You do not reduce yourself to become the people that are speaking ill thoughts. You model what they should be. And I believe that was the most powerful lesson that my mother taught me in so many different ways, that I recalled when I taught for those 44 years in 9 schools. Some of the lessons that I taught my students came from my mother, not from a university campus. Stand up for what's right. Resist injustice. Believe that you have the authority with God's help to change unfair and unsatisfactory conditions. And my students learned that lesson from me without my having to speak those words. I recall on one instance a principal in one school made the rule that students were not allowed to go to the bathroom during the school day. They could only go on their lunch hour or after school. And of course, I was not aware of the rule because I suspect the principal knew that I was not going to facilitate that. But all of the kids were asking to go to the bathroom when they got to my class. And eventually I had to ask them, why is it that every day I'm getting more and more students asking to go to the bathroom during my class period? And one young lady said, because you're the only teacher that allows us to do so. And then we had a discussion. They explained that teachers were told. I told them, I don't believe that. Mr. Lipscomb has 2 children, and they're in a private school, and he would never tolerate a school or school administrators doing that to his own 2 children. And of course, my door was wide open, as it always was. And Mr. Lipscomb was in the hallway listening to my comments to the students. He walked into the room, but I had my back to the door. I knew he was there. I kept talking, and the students were trying to inform me, he's standing behind you. But I never changed direction. And finally, he interrupted me and asked to step out into the hallway to let me know that that was a rule and that he would prefer to discuss it with me after school. And of course, we did. I told him that that is a rule that I cannot implement. And it is a rule that basically violates the civil rights of our kids. Amen. So we cannot have double standards, one set of standards for your children in a private school and one set for the children that live here in Southeast. And of course, he understood, changed the rule. Basically, I asked my students to write a note to their parents indicating that this was a rule that was unfair and why it was unfair. And I wanted them to know that they had say-so in what happens to their children during the day. I've taught most of my career in Wards 7 and 8. And of course, when you teach in a particular school that are under-resourced for years, you begin to believe that that is the norm, and you really don't know any better. It's almost like internalized oppression. You know, you chain someone to a post for 30 years, and you take the chain and shackles off, but they stay there. You've internalized the fact that this is where you belong. And that happens to us too. And it also happens to our kids. But one young lady in that class who was not an A+ student, but I'll never forget the comment she made to me after the discussion with the principal. She said, you know, I noticed that you didn't change up and begin to teach something or say something differently when the principal came in. She said, I don't have any respect for teachers who are afraid of their principal and don't stand up for what's right. I'll never forget that. And what that taught me was that our students are learning lessons from us every day, beyond the lessons that we're teaching from that lesson plan template. They are learning lessons that they will carry with them through life. When is the proper time for me to say no? When do I have the authority to say no to something that is wrong? Should I stand up for a colleague or a friend when they are being bullied? The lessons my mother taught, even to this day, and she died 10 years ago, they shape how I am as a leader of the union. They've informed every decision that I make. And even when you're getting advice from your mother or father, you, in many cases, don't value it at the time. You don't think about it. But it comes to you later in life when you are confronted with a challenge that requires you to draw on that information or that knowledge or that advice. And in so many cases, when in the 9 schools in which I taught, involuntarily transferred on 6 different occasions, not because I was ineffective as a teacher. I was always a highly effective teacher. I had to be, because I simply was not a teacher who was going to go along to get along. I had to be the type of teacher that spoke up when I saw things that were wrong for teachers as well as students and parents. In some of the schools, in several schools in Ward 8, I noted that parents did not have the power to advocate for their children as other parents do. That continues to happen in the district. With the gentrification that's going on in D.C. now, there are parents who are simply given privilege, more privilege than others. They can pick up the phone and call directly to the chancellor's office or to the chancellor's home. They can decide if a teacher is good enough for their child. Some of them can decide whether their child should be in private placement if they have special needs, if they are in need of special support. At this time, we have a teaching force that has been reduced from 72% African American and teachers of color from 2008 till now. The teaching force has dropped from teachers of color from 72% to 49%. Over 75% of the teaching force in D.C. public schools has been replaced by 2 chancellors since 2007. And those 2 chancellors came to Washington, D.C., the first being Michelle Rhee, promising to close the achievement gap, which I was excited to hear, as a teacher who is still concerned about the opportunity gap that exists between the poorest children in D.C., children of color, and the most affluent. It's at crisis level. The only thing I don't understand is why is there not as much outrage about it as there is in states such as Florida. The achievement gap since 2007 in D.C. public schools under 2 chancellors who promised, the first promise that both of them made was to close the gap between the poorest and the most affluent children in D.C. They were given carte blanche, unchecked power to do that. They had no one to answer to other than the mayor. Under mayoral control, that is how it works. And with those, they had the ability to put principals at will, basically mean that you're on a year-to-year contract. And of course, that has cultivated a climate of fear in the school district that prevents teachers in many cases from speaking up or speaking out, even when unsatisfactory conditions exist in their schools that are harmful to children as well as to school workers. I taught at P.R. Harris, which is now closed, for 8 years. And one day, my students came in to ask me after so many times, if they could have some bottled water on my desk. And I always brought a gallon of water. And of course, I had cups. Then I began to ask them, why aren't you drinking water from the fountains? This was a relatively new school. They said the water fountain had been turned low. Of course, I had to check. I couldn't leave my class in the room, so I walked them around the building to check each fountain, and surely enough, the fountains were turned so low that the kids had to literally put their mouths on the spigot in order to get water. So I marched the kids to the office where I asked the principal to explain what was going on with the fountains, and she basically told me that I was out of my lane, this was an administrative matter, and that I was to report back to my classroom. Of course I did. I later found out from one of the custodians that the water had been tested for contamination, with lead contamination. It was found to have had lead, high levels of lead. And of course that alarmed me, and I wanted to see the water report because kids were still drinking it. It turned out that a company, Biospirits, had tested the water. The principal did not want to make a big issue of it. The school district sent bottled water to the school, but it was never noted until I actually had to file a complaint. Tried to file one with OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They said that was not an issue for them. I later filed one with the Board of Education member. The response was for me to be transferred to another school. And that letter came 2 days after I made the complaint to the State Board of Ed member for Ward 8. Of course, I did acknowledge that it would become a news story the following day because I was not someone to be bullied or back down. It was just not in my nature, not in my nature. And my students and colleagues often ask, aren't you afraid to do that? Yes, I am. But my faith is stronger than my fear. And my mother used to say, young lady, you cannot, faith and fear cannot occupy the same brain at the same time. So which one are you, afraid or do you have faith? And the lessons that I knew I was teaching to my students beyond the lesson plan were important to me. I knew from the young lady how much they were watching and listening, observing to see whether or not our actions as teachers were consistent with our words, what we teach. Are we doing those things? Are we standing up and speaking out when things are wrong? And that basically propelled me, no matter how many times I was transferred. And I was transferred several. The contaminated water I was transferred. It was overturned later by a council member because the parents basically stood up, wrote a petition, and said, we want this teacher back in the school. And later at Sousa Middle School, the subject of Brown versus Board of Education in D.C. It was in the Washington Post one day, and I was absolutely astounded that I was teaching in a school that was one of the subjects of Brown. And I shared it with my sixth graders with excitement. I read the article from the Metro section, and I was expecting them to be as excited as I was. And I'll never forget the young lady, quite innocently said, Miss Davis, we're really not interested in that. Back when you were a slave, that's just too far for us to care about. And and it was just, I had to laugh, but there was a part of me was like a dagger, and I had to explain to her, I was never a slave, number one. But I do understand, because you're thinking that this history has nothing to do with you now. It has nothing to do with current conditions in your neighborhood or in your school, but it does. You're sitting here in a school that is 50 years old that used to be for white children only. Did you know that? And they said, well we're here now. I said, but it's deplorable. It's run down. The library's closed. The books are old. And they said, yes. I said, well, then what do you want to do about it? Don't you think that you... Well, we're kids, Miss Davis. I said, but you can read, write, and think. Your parents are not kids. So on the 50th anniversary of Brown, the kids were invited by Congresswoman Norton to come to the Congressional Black Caucus's forum to commemorate Brown versus Board of Ed. And I wanted them to be prepared with more than just facts about the case. I wanted them to use the facts from the case to take it to the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, to say, 50 years after Brown, this is the best we can expect? I took a copy of the case and wrote a story from the facts in the case, knowing that my students, the little girl, she was quite clear, and I knew she was telling the truth. None of my students were interested in that. So I sat up and typed a 5-page story based on the facts in the case, Bowling versus Sharp. Walked into my classroom the next day and announced that a little black boy was suing the principal because he was too black to come to Sousa. I don't need to tell you that opened up a can of worms that I couldn't close. all of them wanted to know which student was suing Mr. Lipscomb. And I had to tell them, you will only know after you read the story. It's all here. And they read for 30 minutes. And finally, they got down to the last page and said, this happened in 1953. Yes, but by then, they were into it. Those kids, and of course, they had to design a School of the Future model each year. That year, they kept the model exactly like the school that's now sitting there because it was designated as a historic landmark. They won first place in the architectural. They went up against 3 states, and they won first place based on their knowledge of the Bowling case. And of course, I was absolutely proud of them. Those students won 5 days out of school. They were able to visit Sidwell Friends at the time. They had 1 day to visit a school that was highly rated and one that was actually deplorable. So I took them to Woodson, which was the old Woodson at the time, because I wanted them to see what was outside of the world that they considered to be their world, outside of their own community. And of course, on the 50th anniversary, they were not only invited by the Congressional Black Caucus. While they were at the Congressional Black Caucus Forum, Senator Kennedy and Nancy Pelosi were there. They invited me to bring the students to the Senate's commemoration of Brown. And of course, I agreed to do so. The students prepared their 2-minute testimonies. I took 14 of them to the Capitol with 2 friends driving 3 cars. I had jumped on the train with the kids. My kids, I loved writing, so I naturally wanted them to learn to write. And they had their scripts, which they had worked on for weeks. And they were excited about it, so they wouldn't get on the train, and I'm chasing them around the train and yelling like a teacher. Senator Daschle, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, said, I knew you were the teacher when I saw you come in with the kids. I could see that your hair was just standing out here. And of course, those kids, when we walked into the room, immediately I was informed that the students would not speak, only 1 student and myself. So here I am in shower shoes, a denim skirt, and a T-shirt. And of course, C-SPAN covers everything, every Senate program such as that. C-SPAN covered that, and it went viral. Friends in California called me and emailed and said, we saw you on C-SPAN with your student. And of course, the young lady that was chosen to speak was powerful. They thought that she was going to get up and talk about the history of the Bowling case. Within 3 minutes, she shamed every senator in that room. She said, I know that you're here to celebrate 50 years of Brown versus Board of Ed, but I clearly do not understand what you're celebrating because I am in the school in Washington, D.C. now as a student. And the school has the same books that were there in 1953 in its library. Some of the books, the pages are so old that they fall apart when you touch the pages. She said, we haven't had a librarian in our library for 3 years because they don't think it's important for us to have a library or a librarian. The principal said it's simply not in our budget. And she went on to talk about the condition of the facility itself. The school district that year decided to tear the school down. The kids made the case to maintain the building as a historic landmark before the Council's Committee on Education. And the building now stands there as a $19 million facility that was renovated. And included in the modernization part of the building is a gallery showing the history of the Bowling case. So the kids who came back to see that school announced to the security guard, who would not allow them to come in, that this building is here because of us. And basically, when I think of the lessons that students learn about the possibility, the power and the authority they have with faith to change unsatisfactory conditions, that is carried over even now in the work that I do. I will never stop being a teacher. I think I said to one of the teachers, Ms. Slaughter, when I came in, I told her that I've been a teacher for 44 years and I'm still a teacher. I will be a teacher even after I retire. It's just not possible for you to stop. On one occasion, when I took students on a field trip from Sousa, the line on the Minnesota Avenue strip would not pick students up because they said they vandalized the buses. Nobody told me that. So I'm standing out there with 23 kids and the buses are passing by. and I'm yelling. The kids are laughing because they said, Miss Davis, you don't know. They don't pick us up on Minnesota Avenue. And they went on to explain why. So when the next bus, I saw it coming, I stepped out into the street and just stood there with my hands up. The bus had to stop. And of course, I ushered the kids on. The bus driver said, ma'am, I said, listen, I'll take it up with your supervisor because, first of all, I'm not understanding how is it that 3 buses passed these students and none of you stopped to pick them up, including the adults that are standing here. But the boys in that group who got on and sat down, I watched them as women came onto the bus with groceries. One lady came on who was pregnant, and I stood up to give her my seat. And then, of course, one of the young men who said, Miss Davis, should I give her? I said, of course. He did. The others began to do the same as people got on. They began to help the young lady off the bus with her groceries. And that came from observing. I didn't have to say that to them. They just observed, what did I do? And basically the lessons that I learned from my mother were from observing her year after year, even when I was in disagreement with her about whether or not I should have a curfew at the age of 17. My brother doesn't have one, and he's 16. And of course, Sally Davis Pointer did not care anything about how other people raised their children. And she let us know that the law in her house, she made the law. And if you know of another household that has a law that's different, you can always move there. Always move there. She never wavered. And the things that I admired about her, and there were so often I was upset because I was being punished to wash dishes. She finally admitted, you are not going to be able to find a husband because you do not want to learn to cook. And I said, Mom, all men don't care about cooking. She said, okay, you'll find that on your own. But she would have me in the kitchen to bake biscuits. And the whole time I'm there, I'm talking about something else. Mom, I'm going to redesign your radiator covers. Mom, I'm going to build a corner. She knew that I was not in. She finally gave in to that. Because those things that I was interested in basically were engineering in nature. I loved designing furniture. And I actually signed up for carpentry when I was in high school and was denied admission because I was a female. Later, at Jefferson, the school where I had to file the Title IX, the girls in my class were told that the second semester they would be allowed to take any of the other vocational education courses. Although they took drafting from me, I instructed them that the second semester they would be able to build some of those projects in woodworking or in construction, and that they could go. Second semester came, none of the girls were allowed to enroll in any courses other than cooking and sewing. So I filed another Title IX sex discrimination on behalf of my female students, and it opened up all of those classes at Jefferson and throughout the city. Absolutely. And of course, was I afraid? Yes, I was. When I filed the one for myself, the principal didn't retaliate immediately. He simply gave me 42 students. Well, being a new teacher, enthusiastic, excited, I just assumed that was the norm. And 15 of them later, I was told, were special education students. But because I didn't know they were special education students, I didn't teach them as if they were. I expected them to reach the same bar I set for all students in the room, and they did. I expected them to be able to read the architectural scale to the nearest 32nd of an inch, and they did. I took a lot of Tylenols before because some of them, and I recall to this day one young man who said, "You don't expect me, don't you know that I'm a special child?" I said, "That's why I know you can do this." And it took him a while, but when he finally got it, he had it. And of course, it wasn't until mid-year that a math teacher, and I'll never forget her, because teachers then mentored you if you were new teachers. They helped you. This teacher came to me and said, "You do realize that you have too many students in here, that there is a contract that protects you from this." And I said, "Show it to me." And she did. And of course, once I learned that exceeded my class limit, I complained about it and it was reduced. But I was also blessed to get, for the first time, my very first year, Barbara Sizemore as the superintendent of schools. She came to the building. Yes, I adored her. And I didn't know who the superintendent was, but she came to the building, to Jefferson that day, to visit. She did a walkthrough with her deputy superintendent, Elizabeth Yancey, and her regional superintendent, Dorothy Johnson, 3 women. And they wanted to know where the drawings in the hallway had come from. And the principal, of course, had to bring them to my classroom, where I was running in circles with 42 students, teaching drafting on armed desks with 24-inch T-squares. And they said, why does she have so many students? Later, I was told that he was encouraged, strongly encouraged, to reduce the class size, find drafting tables and the appropriate tools, and to ensure that I did not go into another semester without the resources I needed. From that point forward, I had more support with 3 women leading the school district. And this 3rd year there, I was asked to teach at an aerospace high school, Randall, up the street from Jefferson. My career, I would not say it took off at that time, but I began to feel very confident about my calling to be a teacher. I realized that my classroom was a social justice laboratory that allowed me to teach lessons that I wanted to teach that were not in any curriculum, but lessons that I knew that my students would need to navigate the life that they've been dealt. A lot of the lessons that students learn that they need to learn in some of the schools where I taught were kids whose parents did not have the resources. They did not have a lawyer. In many cases, I had students who were reporting to school from shelters. But I felt that I had a responsibility, an obligation to teach my students those other R's beyond reading, writing, arithmetic. I felt the need to teach my students how to rise up when things were wrong, rise up when people were trying to put a foot on your throat and keep you down, when things were not just in your community or in your school. Question me. If there are rules that are made that violate your rights, don't be afraid to question it. Don't be afraid to question even a politician that comes to we had often the council members who would come to the school to visit, and I wanted the students to feel comfortable asking them questions about conditions in their school, funding, the fact that they didn't have a playground. This is the person that you should talk to. Your parents elected him. Write letters to them. And to this day, I have students who still write letters to me because they have the same email address that I had at my last year at Phelps. They send letters from their universities. They want me to write a letter of recommendation. They want me to know where they are, what they're doing, how they're doing. And then they remind me of some of the things that I've done. And in many cases, they would acknowledge incidents that were not that relevant to me, but it was to them. One young lady said, Miss Davis, you always would make the comment about if you had a business, you would hire me as a student, as an employee. And I had that going in my class. It started as a joke. I told one young man who came in, I said, you know, if I was a CEO, you would not be able to work in my company. And he said, why? And I went on to explain. And of course, when those who showed self-direction, the ability to think outside the box, I would always praise them. You know, if I was a CEO, you would be the first person I would employ. And I would say, why? They all began to compete for that. Would you hire me, Miss? Yes, I would. Why? Because you think outside the box. In addition to being able to pass a test, you also know how to use your common sense quotient. Because the test, in my opinion, is only one aspect of your becoming a successful person or a successful student. The other has to come from other areas. Character development. What is in your character? How do you treat others? Even people that you don't know. When you see someone who's being bullied, if you're sitting next to a friend who's not welcoming another student or friend, do you speak up? Because I know you think that you're being there and silent, that you're not a facilitator of the crime. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You have a responsibility to stand up and speak up, irrespective of what your friends are doing, because it makes you a better person. It says you are showing others how they should behave. You're not simply telling them. But do not believe that life is a spectator sport where you can sit by and watch things that are happening to others, even if it's not happening to you. In every school I've been assigned, if one of my colleagues was in need of help, struggling, or being treated unfairly, I felt as if I was too. In this very school, Sousa Middle School, we had 2 staffs, 2 faculties. Gentrification began to set in D.C. We now have a teaching force that is predominantly white. Teachers are coming from all over the nation to teach in Washington, D.C. And at this particular school, we had a young male teacher who happened to have been white, who was a Princeton graduate, very smart, a very good teacher. But he was no better than some of the other teachers there. However, he was given carte blanche privilege. He was able to suspend students. He was given the 2nd floor of the building. He could hire his own teachers. And on an entire wing of that school, there were only white teachers hired and interviewed by him. Any other teachers coming into that building were interviewed by the personnel committee. Any white teacher coming into the building were interviewed by him. And teachers observed this. It went on for at least a year. And I felt that I was not being true to myself to ignore it. One of the math teachers came to me, an African-American older woman, and she said, "Ms. Davis, as a building representative, I want you to know that I have old books from 1985, math books. And the newest teachers in the building have brand new textbooks that were ordered this year. And I don't think it's fair." And I said, "Then we'll take that to the principal." And we did. It went nowhere. Our next faculty meeting, when all of the teachers were there in the room, I brought it up in front of all of them. But I wanted my colleagues who were white, and to this day, one of those teachers is a manager at the central office. I went over to him and put my arm around his shoulder and said to the principal, "This is not about a white or black issue. This is about the right thing. And the teachers that are sitting at this table who are all white are going to stand with me. Isn't that right? Because they do not want any privilege that is not afforded to their colleagues." And these teachers have been given new textbooks. They have planning periods every day. They never cover classes. They have class sizes that are the norm when other teachers have excessive caseloads, old textbooks. And I'm telling you, Mr. Lipscomb, these teachers are not going to. They're going to stand with us on saying that we will not tolerate that behavior. And the room fell silent. So silent it was uncomfortable. The principal responded by saying, "Ms. Davis, it appears that nobody knows what you're talking about." And the teacher that brought the issue to me said, "We don't have that problem here." So basically, that sort of left me out on a limb, giving the impression that I was raising an issue that was not relevant to that staff, and it was then, and it still is now. It was just an issue that is very uncomfortable for us to talk about in mixed audiences. But as a result of ignoring it, our kids suffer, our teachers suffer, and our school suffers. When I talk about the diversity of the teaching force, I'm simply not saying that children of color need teachers of color. I'm saying that children of color and white children need teachers of color. I'm saying that because we have a global society, we need to have a diverse teaching force. And because we are unable, if we're unable to address issues of race, class, gender differences, whatever differences exist in our society, if we're not able to address those differences in our schools or with each other, our kids are going to miss some very valuable lessons. It does not matter how uncomfortable it becomes. My colleagues, and one of the things that the young lady that taught me one of the most important lessons was, are you going to change your words or your thinking because of your audience? She said, Miss Davis, one thing I respect about you is that you don't change direction when the people in the room change. It doesn't matter. And we have got to be able to have these conversations in order to save our kids, save our schools, and also save our teachers. The mothers, those who are not teachers, who did not go to a university to become teachers, the lessons that you taught at home to your children, to your kids who became teachers, those lessons continue to teach others in every school. So I want to say to you, Happy Mother's Day. The teachers that are in the room, Happy Mother's Day. I applaud you for the work that you have done, and will continue to do. I feel horrible. Thank you. Oh, God. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord.
We're reminded that we need to have those advocates and those warriors that are in those places that choose to stand up. And one of the things that we need to remember is that even our celebration of Mother's Day has become something that has become created in such a way that it's sentimental type of occasion. Most of you know that Women's Day originally had to do with women standing up against war, women standing up and demanding peace in the world and peace in the nation, and being advocates for peace and justice. And of course, what happened is folks say, oh, we got to take that over because we can't have all the women standing up there advocating for stuff that is going on in this world and talking about justice. So we try to take it. But let's remember that it is because of your mother and my mother and our mother that we're here, that we still have the power to continue to advocate on. And we know, just as the song says, somebody prayed for us, had us on their mind. Somebody carried us through. And so we're reminded, thank you, Liz, for reminding us of the ability to stand. And that's not something that's incongruent with our gospel. Our gospel is about standing up and advocating for that which is just and right. And I pray that somebody today said, well, I want to be a part of a movement. A part of a movement that speaks about justice. A part of a movement that advocates for our sisters and brothers. I want to be a part of something that is positive, something that is uplifting. I want to be part of that. If that's you, we invite you to come forward. We invite you to come forward today. If that's you, let us prepare to stand and sing. What are we going to say now?
391, I will trust in the Lord.
I will trust in the Lord.
391.
What is it, 391?
Yes, sir.
Over our lives and in our lives. And so we invite you to come and share in these elements that are presented on this Mother's Day. We'll have a prayer for the bread and a prayer for the covenant this time. Let us pray. Mother God, great Lord, here we are at your table of grace, acknowledging and knowing the gift of your Son, Christ Jesus, and his death that he died on the cross. Father, Mother, God, we ask that you consecrate now to our purpose this bread that represents the broken body of Jesus the Christ,
who died so that we may have eternal life. Bless for forgiveness of sins and for those things that may have been unpleasing to you. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
It was on the evening that our Lord and Savior was betrayed. He took bread, and after he had given thanks for it, he took and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body which is broken for you. Each time that you take of it, do it in remembrance of me. Likewise, I remind you to remember all of those whose bodies have been broken in the struggle for justice and for freedom and for liberation, as their bodies were broken in the struggle. We remember them, and we remember Jesus, our Lord and our Savior." It was on that same evening that he took the cup. And again, after he had given thanks for it, he said, "This is my blood, the blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins and for the creation of a new society. Each time that you take of it, do it in remembrance of me. And likewise, I remind you to remember all of those whose blood has been shed in the struggle for justice and for freedom and for liberation. As their blood was shed in the struggle, we remember them, and we remember Jesus, our Lord and our Savior. Come and eat, come and drink, all has been prepared. Our deacons will serve you, and we ask that you hold communion until we've all been served and we can take communion together. Savior Jesus Christ. Let us take and drink this and do this in remembrance of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Let us join in the prayer that Jesus taught to us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Let us prepare to adjourn from our worship together today to the feast time and receive the benediction. Once again, happy, blessed Mother's Day to all of you. May you be filled with goodness, may you be filled